up on For the Record. This past week, the government shutdown became the longest in U.S. history. What Wisconsin lawmakers in Washington say needs to happen now.
The spending process in Washington has been broken for decades.
It's very clear who's at fault, but I just want to get back to work. I don't need to point any more fingers.
Plus, the latest attempt to ban drop boxes in Wisconsin.
Absentee ballot drop boxes do not encourage confidence in the result of our elections.
But could it make it past the governor's desk?
My problem is a reality-based problem, a political problem.
And it's off to the races for Wisconsin's second highest office, where the 2026 lieutenant governor race stands. That's all coming up this morning.
We now present For the Record.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Ellie LaLiberte. Well, this past week, the government shutdown became the longest in U.S. history. Democrats and Republicans in a stalemate over Affordable Care Act subsidies set to expire at the end of the year. This graph shows you the top 10 longest shutdowns in our nation's history. And in second place, the 34-day shutdown also under President Trump back in 2018. Now, on Thursday, I sat down with Wisconsin's representatives in Washington to see where their party stood at the end of the week. Thanks for joining us this morning, Congressman. I want to get started by asking why you think this has been the longest shutdown in U.S. history.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it never had to happen. Generally, when there's a continuing resolution, it's something agreed to by Democrats and Republican leadership in the House and the Senate. And we've done that, I think, every year I've been there, at least some form of it, because we didn't get the budget done on time. This year, we're a little more behind than usual with the Republicans in charge of everything. But also, a CR, the way they wrote it, without any Democratic representation, locks in the health care cuts from the big ugly law, locks in the food assistance cuts, locks in the education cuts, locks in the rescissions that the president did, stealing funds that Congress approved in a bipartisan way. And we're simply fighting for people to have affordable and accessible health care. And, you know, this fight, I think the American people get, at least from our perspective.
Is the Democrat strategy working right now? Democrats want to include those extensions, as you mentioned, before passing a funding bill. Is that a successful solution?
Well, the American people certainly want us to do that, right? You can see it from all the polling. So if the Republicans choose to accept that or not, the problem is they jeopardized 15 million people's health care. Plus, we're all seeing the increases in group plans and others because of their actions without any alternative. They've had literally 15 years since this was passed to have an alternative health care plan. The closest we got was during the presidential debate. Donald Trump had a concept of a plan, which, by the way, we never saw that concept. You can't take away health care without having some sort of alternative. And, you know, that is fundamentally the Republicans' problem.
And some of your fellow colleagues have said that Democrats are holding the Republican Party hostage. Can I get your response to that?
Yeah, you know, they're in charge of the House and the Senate and the White House. I think everyone gets that. They did a CR, unlike how we do CRs, where you get together and work with people. You know, it's very clear who's at fault, but I just want to get back to work. I don't need to point any more fingers.
And I want to get your take now, too, because there's some talks of a deal. Some Senate Democrats are speaking with Republicans about passing the House GOP's clean funding resolution in exchange for a vote on those ACA subsidies after the government reopens. Do you think that's a fair deal?
I think they have to get really ironclad language. It's hard to have a deal with someone when you know that another partner, Donald Trump, could break the deal immediately, and then everything you fought for isn't a reality. So I think the tricky part is, how do you really have ironclad language, and how do you make the Republicans stand up to Donald Trump if he breaks those deals?
And Congressman, how do you see this shutdown ending?
I'm hoping, I mean, the reality is their artificial deadline of 7 weeks is almost done. So you have to kind of bring us back, right, to put a new deadline out there of whatever they're going to try to propose. So look, it's time to quit holding your breath. House Republicans have to call us back into session. We have to deal with this issue and many other issues, but to continue not having us at work, I think, is something the American people are really tired of.
Do you think as we approach that deadline, we could see more of a resolution?
I think so. You almost have to, right? Because if the deadline is completely gone, they lose any credibility in why they're not bringing us to work. So I think it is getting to the point that they're tactic has not worked for them, and I think they've got to have a new tactic, which is bringing us back in because the deadline they put out there is not going to work at this point. So to me, that's probably the single thing moving us towards some resolution.
Congressman Mark Pocan, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Now, we're also joined by Republican Congressman Brian Stile. Thanks for being with us this morning. Now, I want to get started with the same question I asked your colleague, which is why is this the longest shutdown in U.S. history?
The spending process in Washington has been broken for decades. I think we shouldn't be in this position in the first place. In fact, I support legislation that takes what I call the Wisconsin idea to Washington, D.C. and ends all shutdowns for all time. It simply says we're going to continue the government on 2-week intervals until a new spending bill comes to fruition. That's exactly the core idea of what we do at the state budget and the state of Wisconsin, why we never have a state of Wisconsin government shutdown. That said, we're here. How do we get out of it? My view is passing the clean CR that the House now passed weeks ago to get us back into regular order, have those discussions and debates on fiscal year 26 spending as well as other priorities. Yet we continue to see the Senate fail to be able to overcome the filibuster of Democrats in the Senate, and the consequences of the Schumer shutdown, unfortunately, continue to build.
And I want to get your take now, too, because there's talks of a deal with some Senate Democrats speaking with Republicans about passing the House GOP's CR that you were just talking about in exchange for a vote on the ACA subsidies after the government reopens. Do you think that's a fair deal?
I think that's a reasonable approach. I've been open the entire time to having those negotiations and discussions about how we address the rising cost of healthcare, in particular, the enhanced temporary subsidies that were put in place during the pandemic that go to insurance companies. And so all of these things should be discussed. We simply want to remove the brinksmanship that is driving the negotiations and instead have a more cerebral, thoughtful process about addressing not only the rising cost of healthcare inside the Affordable Care Act, but the rising cost of healthcare across the board to so many American families.
And I also wanted to ask about a bill you proposed, which would stop lawmakers in Congress from getting paid during the shutdown and deduct payments from the next Congress for each day the government isn't funded come another shutdown. Can I ask why you proposed that?
Members of Congress shouldn't be getting paid if members of the military aren't getting paid and the government's shut down. It's one more step in the process to force members to the table to reopen the government. I'm for giving my pay at a period of time when others aren't receiving theirs. But I think that should be the law, that no member of Congress should receive pay if the federal government is closed and members of the military or air traffic controllers or so many others aren't receiving their pay for their work.
What do you say to individuals right now who are frustrated with both sides of the aisle because they're feeling the impacts of this at their dinner table?
Well, I would say call your Democratic senators and say pass the clean CR that the House passed now over a month ago to make sure that the consequences and the chaos that are resulting from the Senate's actions end immediately. This can end immediately if the Senate passes the clean CR. These are the consequences that we knew would come if we were unable to have the Senate move forward and pass this resolution. It's incredibly painful, beyond frustrating, and I think what we need is more pressure to end the filibuster of Democrats in the Senate against paying SNAP, against paying members of the military, and against reopening the government.
That was Republican Congressman Brian Stile with us earlier. Our full interviews with both representatives are up right now on channel3000.com. And after more than a week of uncertainty, Wisconsinites will receive full federal food assistance. On Thursday, a federal judge ordered President Donald Trump to release all emergency funding to provide federal food assistance through SNAP. That was in response to the president saying he would only partially cover the benefits due to the government shutdown. Shortly after the judge's order, the president's administration appealed the decision. In handing down the order, the judge said the administration failed to consider the harms to people who rely on SNAP would suffer. About 1 in 8 Americans rely on SNAP, including 700,000 Wisconsinites. Nationally, Democrats are coming off big wins in the first major elections of Trump's presidency. New York's mayoral race drew the biggest turnout in more than 50 years, with 34-year-old Zohran Mamdani beating the Trump-backed former governor Andrew Cuomo. In California, voters approved a measure to redraw the state's congressional map to favor Democrats, in response to the Texas legislature doing the same for the Republican Party. And in New Jersey and Virginia, 2 Democrats won the gubernatorial races. And an update now to a story we've been following for months. The man arrested after a Milwaukee judge allegedly helped him evade federal agents has been sentenced to time served for illegally re-entering the states. According to his attorney, Eduardo Flores Ruiz will soon be deported after spending nearly 7 months in jail. Prosecutors claim the Milwaukee judge Hannah Dugan helped Flores Ruiz avoid immigration agents in April when he appeared in her courtroom for unrelated charges. Dugan has pleaded not guilty. Her attorneys argue she has the authority to conduct her courtroom as she wishes. And next on For the Record, a Republican proposed bill could once again change the landscape of Wisconsin's elections. What debate it's spurring when we come back. Welcome back to For the Record. A Republican-authored bill at the state capitol seeks to bar Wisconsinites from using absentee drop boxes in elections. But this fight is nothing new in Wisconsin. In July 2022, the conservative majority on Wisconsin's Supreme Court banned drop boxes outside of election clerks' offices. But in April of 2023, the court's ideological majority flipped, and 3 months later, a lawsuit asked the High Court to revisit its decision. 1 year later, the court ruled officials can place ballot drop boxes around their communities. And Tuesday, the latest attempt to undo that move went before the Assembly Committee on Campaigns and Elections. It may be one of the shortest bills of the legislative session, but with one line, this proposal from Representative Lindy Brill could once again change the landscape of Wisconsin elections.
Absentee ballot drop boxes do not encourage confidence in the result of our elections.
But that sentiment is met with opposition.
I am extremely opposed to this bill.
At a hearing on Tuesday, Greene County Clerk Ariana Vogelli speaking against Brill's proposal to ban drop boxes in Wisconsin.
There is nothing that requires any clerk or municipality to use a drop box. But by prohibiting the use of drop box, it takes away that choice from everybody.
Absentee ballot drop boxes put ballots in danger of tampering with little to no benefit to voters. AB 560 is a simple bill, which will go a long way towards reinforcing citizens' trust in the security of elections.
Brill fighting an uphill battle Tuesday to convince fellow Republicans on the committee that the bill could get past the desk of Democratic Governor Tony Evers.
So my problem is a reality-based problem, a political problem. My first question is, do you see Governor Evers signing this bill?
Fair question. No, unfortunately.
And Brill not entertaining any regulatory amendments to the legislation. She also credited President Donald Trump for leading charge on the issue.
Do you think that we should be legislating based on what the president wants or what the people of Wisconsin want?
I think a little bit of both, depending on the issue. I think turning to our president for direction isn't a bad thing.
Voters used drop boxes in 2024 when President Trump won the state. And clerks like Vogelli maintain that the boxes are safe and secure.
Even if somebody could get a stack of blank ballots and pull a bunch of voter names to put on the certificate envelope, there are so many other checks and balances downflow from that process that will allow us to see that something is not right.
Now, also at Tuesday's meeting, lawmakers discussed another elections-related bill, AB 617. A bipartisan amendment to the bill proposed allowing absentee ballots to begin getting processed the Monday before Election Day. Current law does not allow the processing until the day of. The bill also seeks enhanced reporting for clerks on election night, circuit courts alerting the Elections Commission when someone is deemed incompetent to vote, eliminating the use of central counting locations, and changing the required testing of voting equipment from 10 days before the election to 15. In a Thursday hearing, Vice Chair of the Assembly Committee on Campaigns and Elections, Republican Representative Scott Krug, said his caucus was not fully on board with the bill, and he had to, quote, punt it, and that it will not happen in the fall floor calendar. However, Krug did say he wanted to see the bill pass in the future. And State Superintendent Jill Underly came face to face with the state lawmakers this week after previously skipping a hearing on sexual misconduct in Wisconsin schools. The Department of Public Instruction is facing backlash for its handling of sexual misconduct claims in schools. That's after a Capital Times investigation found 200 incidents of educator sexual misconduct or grooming in a 5-year period. During a Senate Committee on Education hearing, Underly defended her department, saying it follows state statute but could use more resources. At a press conference before that hearing, Underly unveiled a new database to track revoked or surrendered educator licenses.
We're exploring ways to include information about why a license was revoked or surrendered. And we do everything in our power to remove those who harm children from classrooms, and we do it urgently and decisively. Unfortunately, some have chosen to use this deeply sensitive issue to score political points.
This is after Washington County Executive and gubernatorial candidate Josh Schoemann called for her resignation, and several Republican congressmen sent a letter to the governor demanding transparency.
So you say we're making political points or people are making political hay. My frustration is the legislature is getting blamed for stuff, and now you're able to make some counteractions and make some recommendations, which is great. But where was all this before the article ran?
Underly also released other steps she's hoping to take, including establishing statewide standards, modernizing licensing, and strengthening laws. And on Monday, Republicans proposed a bill to make grooming a felony in state law, something Underly says she's in favor of. And Wednesday, a bipartisan committee voted to audit DPI about suspicions, restrictions, revocations, and investigations into educational licenses. The audit, which the agency would conduct itself, will look into the trends in allegations and investigations of recent years. The time elapsed when DPI received the allegation and when it did or didn't begin the investigation, whether the agency's policies comply with state statutes and administrative requirements, and the steps taken to revoke, suspend, or restrict accused teachers' educational licenses. And this, as a new report from the Wisconsin Policy Forum, shows a growing number of Wisconsin teachers have emergency licenses. To obtain one of those, someone needs to have earned a bachelor's degree and passed a background check. Then they can work as an educator for 3 years, while earning the standard teaching licenses. Last year, teachers with emergency licenses made up nearly 4% of public school positions across the state that requires DPI licenses. Now, between 2022 and 2024, the number of emergency licenses went up nearly 20%. Researchers say this reflects Wisconsin's teacher shortage and that districts are no longer using it as a tool to fill vacancies, but rather relying on it as a necessity. And next on For the Record, the race for Wisconsin's next lieutenant governor is underway. How the field is starting to shape up. Welcome back to For the Record. Well, the race for Wisconsin's next lieutenant governor is underway. We have a wide open field for the seat in 2026. Now, the current Democratic Lieutenant Governor, Sarah Rodriguez, is running for governor and will give up her seat. Now, the lieutenant governor is the second highest office in the state and steps in when the governor is out of state or unable to perform their duties. Now, so far, there are 4 candidates in the race. And this week, I sat down with former mayor of Lancaster, Republican David Varnum.
Well, I'm the former mayor of Lancaster. I'm also a former congressional aide for a member of Congress from Southern California, where I was in charge of housing, water, and transportation issues in the district office. And I'm also a former legislative analyst to Dr. James Dobson at Focus on the Family.
Now, Varnum also told me one of his top priorities is lowering taxes, which he says would bring more businesses in.
I think that we need to be very bold on taxes. I think we need to be a leader in the Midwest. I served as the president of Grant County Economic Development in Grant County, which is in the southwest corner. We're bordered by Illinois and Iowa. And what did we see happen? We were getting businesses from Illinois. We were losing them to Iowa. We need to keep our students, our businesses, our employees here. I think being bold on tax policy will help us do that.
Now, Varnum is also partly focusing his campaign on abortion. Right now, abortion is banned in Wisconsin after 20 weeks. And I asked what he thinks of that law.
I think that we need to go further. But I think really we're getting lost in the politics of all of this. As much as the left tries to talk about what Republicans are doing on the life issue, what are they doing? Why aren't they trying to ban it? Why are they not banning full-term abortion. And that is the scary part of this, is they're playing politics instead of really trying to get something passed or to talk about the life issue.
And I want to ask, too, because Congressman and gubernatorial candidate Tom Tiffany told us that he stands by that law and would not look to make any changes if elected to governor. Do you think he's wrong?
Well, I think we need to stand for life as the Republican Party. We have been the party of life. We will continue to be the party of life.
Now, keeping consistent with the message from the biggest name in the governor's race, Republican Congressman Tom Tiffany, Varnum is making trans athletes' participation in sports a prime issue in his campaign. He's come out against transgender women and girls being able to participate in women's sports, in addition to using women's locker rooms. You said specifically keeping transgender women out of girls' sports, but what about the other way? Do you think that keeping transgender men out of men's sports is something that you're also looking at?
I'm concerned about transgender politics and policies in general. I think the WIAA, I'm glad that they reacted like they did when Donald Trump did his executive order, but we need to make sure that that's a permanent ban that is in effect.
Now, this is a controversial issue and would be met with heavy backlash from the other side of the aisle. How do you see getting this policy through?
Well, I understand that we might get backlash from the other side of the aisle, but I also know that in the polling that I'm seeing that between 70 and 80% of Wisconsinites think this is a common sense approach.
Now, Varnum is referring to a 2023 National Marquette Law School poll, which found 71% of registered voters were in favor of requiring that transgender athletes compete on teams that match the sex they were assigned at birth, not the gender they identify with. Now, the other candidates in the race for lieutenant governor include Wisconsin Secretary of State Democrat Sarah Godlewski. Now, the Republicans running are businessman Will Martin and U.S. Army Green Beret veteran Nick Pols. Wisconsin's primary election is set for August 11th of next year to narrow the field. Then in the November 3rd general election, the final candidates for lieutenant governor run on the same ticket with the nominee for governor. For the record, we'll be back right after this. Shutdown's impacts on federal food assistance. Families aren't just struggling to feed themselves. The Dane County Humane Society says owners have come to them concerned they may need to give up their pets because they can't afford to feed them. Now, in an effort to help, DCHS held an emergency pet food drive. Families were able to pick up supplies for their pets, like unopened dog and cat food and cat litter, at a pantry on Saturday. Now, that does it for us this week. And a reminder, you can watch full episodes of the show as well as expanded interviews on our website, channel3000.com. Have a great rest of your weekend. For the record, I'm Ellie LaLiberte.
This has been For the Record.